Alright, so first thing you will need is a headband, and having a wig head to work on is also very handy. I marked where I wanted the antlers to start with a Sharpie, and then for the wire, I'm not positive on the gauge I used because I've had these spools for so long, but I believe it's 14 gauge. I cut an extra long piece with pliers and then folded that in half before wrapping it around the headband for the first antler. You want to try and make sure the wrap is very tight around the headband so the antler will be secured, but if it slips around at this point, that's okay since we will secure it better further on. With enough wraps, I then twisted the sides together all the way up and bent the wire outwards to start the antler shape. You will see. I did the same steps for the other side, and then to help the antlers stay the correct distance from one another without sliding, I used another piece of wire and wound it through the center area between the bases. This is where the wig head was handy because I could tape the headband to it for the rest of the working period. Then, to start creating the branches on the antlers, I twisted smaller lengths of wire together and wrapped those around the larger form. I also used my pliers to pinch the base of these so they would be more secured in place. It's a good idea to go longer with these wires because you can always cut them down in size once they're in place. Continue with this process for the rest of the branches, and then I just took some hot glue and added that to all the connector points on the framework, between the branches and on the headband itself, just to freeze the wire in place and give a little bit more stability. Now, to build up the thickness of the antlers, I just went in with aluminum foil and masking tape, going over all the wires and constantly reviewing what areas needed more padding and extra attention. To make them strong and smoother, I used plaster bandage that I cut into very small strips. For this, you just wet the bandage with water and try to squeegee your fingers along it a few times to really spread the plaster out and fill in the holes in the bandage itself. From there, you can apply it to the masking tape and use wet fingers to smooth out the texture along the antlers. Cold water will give you more working time, while hot water will make it dry faster. Plaster dries pretty fast, but a good trick to know when it's done is to press your nail onto the bandage, and if you leave an indent, it is not fully dry yet. Nice thing about this too is that the plaster can be sanded slightly afterwards, so if you have some lumpy areas left over, you can kind of correct them. Also, don't forget when sanding to wear a dust mask, and if it's flying everywhere, goggles are also a good idea. With everything sanded, I then wanted to add some detailing to the antlers, so I used 3D puff paint. I added some dotting all along the base area and then extra texture lines along the top. Let that puff paint dry fully so it doesn't move on you, and then moving on to the painting, I started with a layer of gesso to make everything white and the same tone, and then I used a brown spray paint to give my base color. From there, I used a goldish yellow and a white acrylic paint along the base and tops of the antlers to create a slight gradient effect. When you get your paint job to the point you're happy with, the next part is very similar to how I did my flower shoulder pieces. I had a ton of fake flowers from the dollar store, and removing their stems, I started hot gluing them to the headband. I added a little piece of craft foam to the top as well, just under the headband, to create more gluing room for the flowers. When I was doing this, I wanted the flowers to almost be all warm tones on top and then move into the cooler colors down the sides, like blues and purples. And once you start going with this, you can glue flowers to other flowers to help secure them, so don't worry if everything can't connect to the headband beneath. How many worlds would you cross? As with my shoulder pieces, I added some extra little fake twigs and greenery to make it a little bit more forest-like.
There is no light on the other side, I say.
Now, one last thing I did for my antlers that is completely optional was add the chains hanging off of them. I got these chains from eBay, and then using jump rings, I fed one piece of the chain into it. And then figuring out how big of a loop I needed for the antler tip, I added the second chain link to the ring and closed it with pliers. Then it can just hang off and you can string it to others the same way. And that was it for my antlers that I made for my Forest Spirit makeup. They took about 2 days to complete and are surprisingly sturdy. So I hope you enjoyed, and I will see you guys next video.
No light on the